Welcome to Pavinars, webinars for the pavement community. My name is Andrew Braham, and today we'll talk about exploring compaction methods for laboratory performance of full depth reclamation. On the left here, you can see a full depth reclamation treatment being placed in the field. You have the reclaiming unit in the center. Some sort of stabilizing agent is being added to the FDR process, and you are reclaiming a certain depth of both bound asphalt concrete and unbound either aggregate base or natural soil. A key part of FDR, though, then is the compaction process. And here you can see a very typical picture after the sheep's foot roller has gone over the FDR material. And sheep's foot rollers have these large knobs on the rolling drum, and that allows for deep compaction, as FDR is anywhere from 6 inches to 18 inches deep in one pass. You then usually pass over with a pneumatic tire roller and a steel wheel roller, but one of the intermediate steps here is the sheep's foot compaction, and that gives a very distinct pattern to the FDR material. Now this work was based on a paper written by, at the time, Sadie Smith, who is now Dr. Sadie Casillas, and Chase Henrichs, who were both working on their master's thesis here at the University of Arkansas. And they wrote the paper entitled Exploring Compaction Methods for Laboratory Performance of Full Depth Reclamation. And they're both on LinkedIn, so you can see below in the description and find both of their LinkedIn profiles. Now let's take a little step back and think about the importance of compaction. And let's start with the definition of compaction. So compaction is the use of mechanical energy to achieve the densification and reorientation of a material by removing air. So when I tend to think of compaction, I always think of the densification. We're trying to remove air from the material we're compacting, but it's also always important to remember how we are potentially reorienting the material as well during this process. But regardless, we're imparting some sort of mechanical energy. Now, why is compaction important for example soil? Well, if we assume we're at the optimal water content, compaction increases the shear strength of the soil. It also increases the bearing capacity, the durability, the resistance to deformation, and the stability. And at the same time, when we're compacting soil at the optimal water content, we're decreasing settlement, we are decreasing the potential for frost damage, and we're decreasing permeability. Now, another common material that we need to compact in the field is asphalt concrete. And again, we're assuming the optimal asphalt binder content. When we're compacting asphalt concrete, we're increasing the stiffness, the strength, the fatigue life, and the durability. And at the same time, we're decreasing the potential of rutting, raveling, and moisture susceptibility. Now, all of these characteristics can be seen both in the lab and in the field, but how do we actually measure compaction in the lab? Now, you can see we talked about soil and we talked about asphalt concrete, and it is important to note that full depth reclamation, or FDR, is not a soil nor is it asphalt concrete. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later. But currently, there are only test methods available to measure compaction of soil and asphalt concrete. So those are the tests that we're going to review. For soil, the two most common compaction tests are the standard Proctor and the modified Proctor. And for asphalt concrete, the two most common methods of compaction are the Marshall hammer and the Superpave Gyratory compactor, or SGC. So let's go through each of these 4 compaction methods in the lab briefly. Let's start with the standard Proctor, which is AASHTO T99. Here we have a hammer, which is 5.5 pounds or 2.5 kilograms, and we drop that hammer 12 inches or 305 millimeters. Now on the right, you can see a picture of a mold with both the bottom and the top sleeve. And there are actually 2 types of molds in AASHTO T99. We have a 101.6 millimeter mold, or 4 inches in diameter, and that's used for methods A and C. But for methods B and D, we use a 6-inch diameter mold, which is about 152.4 millimeters. Now methods A and C and B and D not only differ with mold size, but they also differ with aggregate sizes. So method A and B, you're testing P4 material, or material that is smaller than 4.75 millimeters. And for method C and D, we are passing 3/4 inch material, or 19 millimeter material. So these four methods use two different molds and two different aggregate sizes, but they all follow the same general procedure. Now this general procedure will just be a very broad overview of the process for the standard Proctor. However, I encourage you to look at AASHTO T99 to get all of the details in order to properly run the standard Proctor test. But in general, what you do is you get a sample of soil about 4 to 8% below optimal, and you compact 3 lifts of materials at 25 blows for each lift. After you've compacted those 3 lifts of material, 25 blows at each lift, you measure the density of the total sample. Then you take a center slice from your sample and you get the moisture content. And you repeat this general procedure, increasing the moisture content 1 to 2% until you have 2 points that are beyond the optimal moisture content. So this is the standard Proctor, or AASHTO T99, and there's a couple of key differences when looking at the modified Proctor, or AASHTO T180. And you can see here for the modified Proctor, the hammer is heavier, it's 10 pounds or 4.5 kilograms, and it's dropped from a higher height, 18 inches or 457 millimeters. There are the same molds and aggregate sizes as T99, and the general procedure also has some similarities. You start by obtaining a sample with a moisture content 4 to 8% below the optimal. However, for methods A and C, you compact 5 lifts of material at 25 blows, whereas methods D and B, you compact 5 lifts of materials at 56 blows. So a different number of lifts, and method B and D have a different number of blows as well. You then, like AASHTO T99, measure the density of the total sample, and you can see on the right a picture of the moisture sample from a center slice, and this is how you obtain the moisture content of the sample that you are compacting. And again, you repeat by increasing 1 to 2% of moisture content until you're 2 points beyond the optimal. These are the two most common methods for compacting soil in the lab. Now let's transition over to asphalt concrete. So to start with, we're going to look at the Marshall hammer, or AASHTO R68. Here we have a mold that's 4 inches in diameter and 3 inches in height, and that's 101.6 millimeters and 76.2 millimeters, respectively. You take your aggregate and your asphalt binder, you mix them together, and you cure your asphalt concrete samples, and you want a sample that's approximately 1,200 grams. Again, we'll go over a general procedure. You place this entire mixed and cured asphalt concrete sample or batch in the mold. You then spade it vigorously 25 times, and the word vigorously is in AASHTO R68. You apply 50 to 75 blows from 18 inches high, or about 575 millimeters. You flip the sample and you apply another 50 to 75 blows, and you allow the sample to cure. And you can see on the right that is a compacted asphalt concrete sample using the Marshall hammer. However, when we think about asphalt concrete and how it's compacted in the field, we don't hammer it. We don't drop a weight on the sample. We roll the sample. We roll the asphalt concrete pavement with rollers, either pneumatic tire rollers or steel wheel rollers. And this is why we're moving away from the Marshall hammer and we're moving toward the Superpave Gyratory Compactor, or SGC. And this is AASHTO T312. Here our mold is just under 6 inches diameter, or 150 millimeters, and we also have a 4-inch diameter mold, which is just about 100 millimeters. The sample height, we're targeting 110 to 120 millimeters, which is about 4.5 inches. And in order to get this sample, we mix and cure our asphalt concrete samples, and we're aiming for approximately 4,600 grams. And again, we place the entire batch in the mold, we place a metal plate on top, we place it We slide the mold into the Superpave Gyratory compactor, and we apply a pressure of 600 kilopascals at 1.16 degrees. Then the entire fixture rotates, and because you're at an angle, you're getting a kneading action. And you rotate the sample, or you rotate the angled sample to the desired number of gyrations. And if you take a look at AASHTO R35, you have a description of how many gyrations you should use depending on your mix. So here we have two different Proctor compaction methods for soil. We have the Marshall hammer for asphalt concrete, and we have the Superpave Gyratory compactor for asphalt concrete. But what does this mean for FDR? Well, full depth reclamation, or FDR, is not a soil, it is not unbound, nor is it asphalt concrete. It is not bound. It's a combination of unbound and bound material, and sometimes it's called a semi-bound material. And what you do is you take this unbound and bound material and you bind it with either asphalt emulsion, asphalt foam, or Portland cement. And there you have full depth reclamation. So this is very nice if you have a road that has pretty significantly distressed hot mix asphalt with an old base and subgrade. You pulverize and mix all of the layer together, and this includes all of the bound material, the overlay, the HMA, and it goes down into the base and even potentially into the subgrade, and you inject both water and a stabilizing agent. And that stabilizing agent again can be asphalt emulsion, asphalt foam, or Portland cement. And what you're left with is that deep recycled layer which you place a new surface on. So you have now your subgrade, your FDR, and your new surface. So you can see FDR is not a bound material. It is not an unbound material. It's not asphalt concrete. It's not soil. It's what is typically called a semi-bound material. And what this paper looked at is which compaction method is most appropriate. Well, in order to explore that, we used this aggregate and binder. We used a local quarry, and that local quarry has processed reclaimed asphalt pavement or RAP, and we used class 7 limestone base. And class 7 is a specific gradation of an aggregate base course here in Arkansas. So basically what we did is we took different percentages of RAP and limestone base. And you can see on the left, we used 25%, 50%, and 75% of each one of those materials. And we looked at it at the different ratios. The binder for asphalt emulsion, we used a cationic medium set asphalt emulsion. And then for the foam, we used a PG64-22 to foam the FDR. So we used 3 different aggregate gradations with varying levels of RAP and class 7 limestone base. And we used 2 different stabilizing techniques. We used asphalt emulsion and we used foam. For the compaction methods, we used the Superpave Gyratory compactor. We used a 6-inch slotted mold, a 6-inch unslotted mold, and a 4-inch unslotted mold. We did both standard and modified Proctor compaction. Both of them used a 6-inch mold. Both of them used method C based on the gradation. And I hope you're asking the question, what is a slotted mold? Well, a slotted mold is seen on the left, and typically the Superpave Gyratory compactor has molds that are complete steel. They have no holes in it. But it gets a little complicated with FDR because FDR has water in it. And if you're trying to compact a sample with water and there's nowhere for that water to escape to, pore pressure can start building up. So we wanted to investigate whether or not with these FDR mixtures we were creating, using a slotted or an unslotted mold would cause a large difference in the compaction behavior of our FDR material. The first step was to determine the optimal moisture content, and we're just going to show one graph. This is 25% RAP and 75% class 7. So this would be equivalent to if we were stabilizing 8 inches of pavement structure, 2 inches of that 8 inches would be asphalt concrete, like an asphalt concrete overlay, and then 6 inches of that 8 inches would be an aggregate base. And in our case, it's a class 7 limestone aggregate base. So when you mix all that together, when you reclaim that, you have 25% wrap and 75% aggregate base. And you can see here our final results on the left. We have the modified Proctor, the 3 different Superpave Gyratory compactor molds, and the standard Proctor. The modified Proctor had the highest dry unit weights, and this makes sense because it imposes the most energy during compaction. We really didn't feel like there was a significant difference between the 3 Superpave Gyratory compactor molds, so it didn't matter if it was 4 or 6 inches or slotted or unslotted. And this was a little surprising because we were expecting to have some pore water pressure build up, and we were expecting to see a little bit of difference between the slotted and unslotted molds, but we did not see that. And we think maybe one of the main reasons is because this is a limestone, a highly processed limestone aggregate base, there wasn't a whole lot of cohesion in that soil. So, or the soil equivalent. So if we had put in some natural soil that perhaps had some clay materials or a higher level of fines, we may have had a material that had a little more cohesion. But this class 7 was had a pretty low level of cohesion. We thought it was a cohesionless unbound material. So that's something that to think about as we continue through our analysis. Overall, though, you can see the dry unit weights decrease as the wrap content increases. So if you look at the same graph here, but with 50% wrap and 25% wrap, those dry unit weights would drop and they would go a little bit to the left, which means as you increase the amount of bound material you are reclaiming in the FDR process, chances are your dry unit weight will also decrease. Here is a summary of the optimal moisture content. Another thing that we noticed is as the wrap content increases, we would lose that parabolic shape. So generally when you're looking at moisture content curves, you have a very nice upside down parabola. However, as we increase the wrap content, we lost that and we started getting straight lines. And we felt that higher levels of wrap reduce the sensitivity to both moisture content and the compaction methods. And what that translates into the field is a higher percentage of bound material or bound layer that we're treating reduces the sensitivity to both moisture content and the rolling patterns. And you can see here on the left, the numbers that have, or excuse me, the squares that have a percentage in them, we felt had very clear optimal moisture contents. However, the ones that did not have clear optimal moisture contents, we simply put not applicable or NA. And if there was no optimal moisture content, we followed the North Carolina DOT specifications and set the water at 2 to 3%. Now also based on the data here on the left and the curves, we decided moving forward we were only going to pursue the modified Proctor hammer and the slotted 6-inch Superpave Gyratory compactor. And of course there's many more details in the paper, but this is how we decided to move forward. Now moving over into the performance test. We need to first find the optimal emulsion content, and that is found by mapping the tensile strength at different emulsion contents. And if you look at the unconditioned samples for both the modified Proctor and the Superpave Gyratory compactor, they both pass. Both of them are above the minimum unconditioned strength. But if you look at the unconditioned samples, if you look at the conditioned samples, the Superpave Gyratory compactor passes, but the modified Proctor does not. So over on the left, if you look at the two conditioned samples, which are the purple X's and the orange circles, the Superpave Gyratory compactor passes, but the modified Proctor does not, and that is on the conditioned samples. Now from this data, we found the Superpave Gyratory compactor, we obtained a 4.8% optimal emulsion content. For the modified Proctor, it was a little higher, it was 5% optimal emulsion. Now you can see here in general, we're seeing some relatively nice parabolic shapes and this is for the emulsion, the asphalt emulsion, but the foam contents were not as straightforward. And when we take a look at the foam contents, you can see that there are really no parabolic shapes. The modified Proctor is essentially a straight line. So from this, based on our analysis, we determined an optimal foam content of 4% using the Superpave Gyratory compactor, and an optimal foam content of 3% based on the modified Proctor. And this was based on a pretty detailed analysis, again outlined more in the paper, but our hypothesis was that there was not enough binding agent to take advantage of the higher compaction level. So the Superpave Gyratory compactor and the modified Proctor were the highest amounts of compaction energy into the material. And we felt like the foam was not being distributed enough and there was not enough binding agent to take advantage of that higher compaction level. So this is something where it kind of raised a couple more questions, but we felt like we were able to get our optimal foam contents. Now, looking at the performance at the optimal contents, we followed ASTM D4867, and again, these are at the optimal binder contents. And if you look at the data on the left, we have both emulsion and foam, and we have conditioned and unconditioned samples. And in general, the Superpave Gyratory compactor produced higher tensile strengths than the modified Proctor. And we felt that was because the kneading action, or that rotating angle, allowed for a stronger aggregate skeleton in the Superpave Gyratory compactor, thus increasing the strength of the material. Also, the emulsion provided higher conditioned strengths, but we didn't see a large difference in the unconditioned. So unconditioned without any moisture conditioning, both the emulsion and the foam had similar performance, but then after putting the material through a moisture conditioning, the emulsion had higher conditioned strengths. Now, another reason for these two different compaction methods produced two different air voids too, and the SGC had lower air voids versus the modified Proctor. So the SGC were compacting samples to about 15% air voids, whereas the modified Proctor was compacting them to about 19.1%. So that could also play into the equation here as well. So in conclusion, when looking at the different compaction methods for full depth reclamation, or FDR, we found that as the percent wrap increased, or as the percent bound material increased, the dry unit weight and the optimal moisture content decreased. We found that the Superpave Gyratory compactor produced samples that had higher tensile strengths than the modified Proctor. We found that the asphalt emulsion provided significantly higher condition strength, but there was no statistical difference with the unconditioned samples. And then I think most importantly, we did not use cohesive soils. And FDR does sometimes go down into natural subgrade, which means that you could enter some cohesive material. And that is a recommendation for future work. Now, we talked a little bit about asphalt emulsions. If you're interested in learning more about asphalt emulsions, the University of Arkansas does offer 4 certificates in asphalt emulsions, and they are the introduction, the application, the manufacture, and the quality of asphalt emulsion. And each certificate is on demand and online, so you can register at any time, you can take it from anywhere, and you move through the certificate at your own pace. At the end, you'll obtain 15 professional development hours. You'll be able to print out over 100 pages of reference material for each certificate, and there are special government and academic rates available. You simply need to search Asphalt Emulsion UARK, UARK, or you can click on the link below in the description. Now, if you're interested in learning more about compaction and full depth reclamation, the full paper is available through the Journal of Testing and Evaluation, and there is a DOI link provided here, and finally that is in the compaction below. Now, all this work was done with samples that were taken from the field, and you can see here a picture on the right is Chase Henrichs collecting some samples on Arkansas Highway 98, just outside of Village, Arkansas. So thank you very much for joining us, and hope you have a great day.